You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687. 687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your healthcare? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their healthcare. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your healthcare, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your healthcare while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, our family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
This is Don on the Air. It's a look at today's news and social commentary from an eyes-wide-open perspective. It's up to us to ensure the issues of today are decided by us, not for us, because no one will give us liberty. We must claim it for ourselves. Well, now I was going to comment on the NFL and the flag Kaepernick nonsense last week, but I was too busy rebelling against the manufactured news cycle. I figured I'd just, talk about it this week or something. I mean, it's week 3 of the season, and if people aren't, upset about it yet, then lo and behold, Trump had to go and ruin everything by riling up that doggone NFL. Now, if I talk about it, I'll be just another conformist following the news cycle. But then, if I resist and just do my own thing, then I'm conforming to the anti-media crowd. Oh, what to do. Oh yeah, maybe I'll just be myself. And myself happens to be Don Weston. And this is Don on the Air. Now, I call this whole controversy a controversy because it's not a real controversy. It's fabricated for publicity and to further divide our country. Remember, divided we fall? Yeah, well, you're not the only one. Now, I'll get to the downsides of these divisions a little later this evening, but suffice it to say, divisions, they make us weak, and weakness makes us easier to control. Now, I can prove the whole controversy is nonsense because they redefined it halfway through. Remember, originally, Colin Kaepernick, former quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, well, he first claimed that he knelt for the national anthem in protest of the sinister third verse. The one that seemed to suggest that the author was somehow cheering the death of the slaves who fought for the British. I mean, that's how it all began. Why won't you stand for the national anthem? Because it's racist? I mean, that was it. But you see, most people didn't even know that a third verse existed. Arguably, we only use the first verse as our actual anthem. But since you brought it up, I never really liked the national anthem. I mean, I like what it stands for, I'll specify the first verse if that makes you feel any better. But when you put the entire song into context, it's really just kind of trolling Britain. The song is about one victory in a war of 1812, but, I mean, it's also just about killing the British. And not just the British, but it was about killing them and their servants and their slaves, the ones they manipulated into fighting for them, and so on. I mean, it was like rubbing their noses in it. Plus, it's not even an original tune. I mean, the music was taken from, that's right, the British. It was a song used by, a popular men's social club. So, like I said, it's a song that just trolls the British. It's not racist. The song boasts about killing everyone equally. And I mean, I'd be okay with a discussion about changing the national anthem, but, in a civilized manner. Not amid, offensive protests and false charges of racism. None of that is productive. But at any rate, the controversy surrounding the national anthem itself, I mean, it wasn't sticking. I mean, most people saw through it, and instead, they turned their ire toward the NFL and the players who knelt and the owners who allowed it to happen. I mean, that's really where the blame lies, after all. I mean, for years, the NFL has been an entirely corrupt organization. They've operated as a non-profit for most of their existence. Yeah, a non-profit. Also, for most of their existence, there's been no real morality clauses. Players used to run wild despite their automatic role model status. And, reportedly, a lot of players have, beat their wives or girlfriends in fits of rage. And there's the issues of concussions and, undisclosed yet known health hazards that, again, the NFL had just covered up for years. And, the NFL has gone out of its way to maximize profits at the expense of its players. And then, with the national anthem controversy, it was at the expense of their fans. But people, they still tend to take it too far. It's funny. I saw just yesterday, someone on Twitter was saying something like, well, you can't protest when you're at work or give it a try at your job. Well, the fact is, that's a matter of company policy. You can protest at work if your job supports it, doesn't care, or just ignores it. That's what we have with the NFL and some of the team owners, They either support the protests, don't care, or they just ignore it. Now, there were some owners and coaches who've said that, they would terminate contracts if players knelt during the national anthem, but others, they support the players' cause. Now, they're the ones who get to decide how to run their business, not you, not the government. I don't understand. Is this what people want to happen? Do they want the government to step in or say something? Is this why we're suddenly bringing up, who has the right to say and do as they wish? I wouldn't even care, but think. This is what the left did after the white supremacy march in Virginia. They came out and they said, racists don't have a right to speak about their beliefs. Well, the same people who condemn the left for trying to control the First Amendment are pretty quick to determine who can use the First Amendment when something offends them, like kneeling for the national anthem. So, working it back around, the whole national anthem controversy thing began as a protest about, the alleged racism of the national anthem. And, the mainstream ultimately dismissed it as the nonsense that it is. So, what were they going to do? Players were still kneeling, for the national anthem from the NFL on down to even high school teams. They still had national attention. Well, police brutality seemed to be working for Black Lives Matter, so, yeah, they shifted the purpose of the cause. Now players kneel for the national anthem to somehow protest police brutality. You see, had the players not been kneeling, all over the place, or had the mainstream just simply ignored it, then the kneeling would have only ever had been about the forgotten, resurrected, and then misrepresented verse from the national anthem. What's more, it killed me that people were actually protesting because Colin Kaepernick couldn't find work. It would seem, a mediocre quarterback should be guaranteed work for some reason. I didn't realize the NFL had tenure. Apparently, there are folks who think they do. But Kaepernick, he let his team down again in 2016. And just as happens with plenty of players since the birth of the NFL, he was cut from the team. I guess it's more difficult for an aging quarterback of mediocre skill to find employment as a quarterback on a professional football team. Never mind the baggage he carries with him, So if you believe the news coverage, there were protests all across the country about how Kaepernick was allegedly not hired by NFL teams because he protested against police brutality. Remember, that's not even what the kneeling thing was about. Yet there was a protest here in Atlanta, I think in August, of about 100 people who, were out there saying Kaepernick was shut out of the NFL because he stands up against racism. Yeah. See, these are the false narratives that are being spoon-fed to our youth, especially in our inner cities. This is the nature of division and why it's a sinister tactic that we must be wary of. The more divided we are, the easier we are to control. When we're distracted by fighting one another, we're not paying any attention to what the government's doing. And trust, they'll be keeping the peace at all costs, even at the expense of our Constitution. What else is going on in the media? Oh, I don't know. I admit I didn't pay much attention this week. My wife and I celebrated our 16th anniversary, and, she took half the week off of work, so we relaxed and spent a lot of time together. And it was great. You know, we went to see Michael Carbonaro live on Friday at the fabulous Fox Theater in Atlanta. If you're not familiar with Carbonaro, he hosts The Carbonaro Effect on True TV. It's a hidden camera magic TV show. And he's amazing with personal, intimate magic, and the reactions of the people he interacts with are just hilarious. Anyway, his stage show is wonderful. I mean, he performs some magic, but, you know, the show is very funny. And the way he uses participants and his overall stage presence, well, he's a true performer. And I highly recommend taking in the show if you have the opportunity. But I don't know. I know I wanted to talk a little bit about Jimmy Kimmel and some of his remarks about the Graham-Cassidy healthcare bill, but Kimmel's concern is with pre-existing conditions, and I can understand his immediate concern. I mean, considering, you know, the medical issues his family's been dealing with recently. You know, his beef is really with the language between he and Senator Cassidy. I do have one objection to raise about Kimmel's comments, though, but I'll save that for a little later when I'm talking about health insurance, probably in the next segment. I do know that I'm starting to miss the hippies, though, out of left field. No, not the hipsters. I mean the hippies, you know, from like the 60s and the 70s. The, you know, make love, not war crowd. I mean, they used to, you know, want the world to give up their nukes and make the world a beautiful and loving place. But it seems the descendants of the hippies are just mad. I mean, they're becoming Antifa fascists, you know. They seem to be cheering on nuclear proliferation. I mean, when the Iran nuclear deal was going through, right, I couldn't believe how many people were cheering it on and supporting it, you know, just because Barack Obama was negotiating the deal. I remember questioning it with my wife. You know, what happened to all the hippies, I asked, and she just shrugged and replied, it's socialism. You know, if we have nukes, everyone gets nukes. And then I said, man, I miss the hippies. Because she's right. You know, there's this whole movement, you know, to redefine socialism. Well, not the result, you know, of course, but they're trying to pretty it up, you know, make it sexy, make it sellable. You know, this is one of the reasons they want us, the citizenry, divided. You know, if we're at each other's throats, it'll be pretty clear we need an intermediary to step in and settle things. An intermediary like the federal government. You know, the government who can step in and keep us in line. Control us. I guess I'll get into some of that a little later on as well. Now, the socialism, you know, not the hippies. So let's take a quick break and get into something deep, and we'll see where things go from there. When Don on the Air returns in just a moment.
My name is Taylor Fisher, and this is the American Foundation. Federalist Number 62 by James Madison. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. When passed, the Affordable Care Act of 2009 was 2,300 pages long. The current Republican health care bill is only 46 pages long. Although much shorter, it is still dizzying to read and understand. Overall, no one actually knows the total number of federal laws on the books. I can't imagine the look on James Madison's face if he were to read these statistics. Our federal government was designed to be limited in power and slow to action. Although many Americans might think the feds are slow to act, they have certainly not been limited in their powers. It's high time Americans start remembering who is really in charge and hold their representatives accountable to the Constitution, which Mr. Madison worked so desperately hard to protect. This has been the American Foundation, brought to you by FederalistCoalition.org.
This is Don on the Air. Oh, yeah. It's on now. I know what you're thinking. He's going to talk about elected officials and their health insurance takeover and how it's breaking the law. And you'd be right. There is a reference here. I'll get to it in a moment. Now, I'll admit, I honestly don't know a lot about this Graham Cassidy bill yet. Not the details, anyway. I've not had the opportunity to actually read the bill yet. I only know what others have speculated, and I get the general gist. I mean, it honestly sounds like an attempt to rein in the federal government and return power back to the states. It sounds flawed in places, like every other plan, but still, it sounds like it might be a good start. I mean, now there are a couple of issues, generally speaking, with dumping health insurance on the states. I mean, we need to ensure that our state legislators and governors fully understand the details, the specifics of the Constitution. Many of them don't. I mean, that responsibility falls on us, the voters. We need to fully investigate our candidates and only elect the ones who not only understand the Constitution, what it is, why we need it, and what it means to protect it, but will actually uphold their oath to support and defend the Constitution. I can't say it enough. When someone's elected to a high office, they swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And any time these folks propose, vote for, or otherwise create a law that infringes on the supreme law of the land, they violate their oath. Now, the states, they would also need to have their own plans in place, which should be tailored to suit the preference of their individual citizenry. They also need the money, to afford it. Ideally, the government would take substantially less in taxes, allowing the states to manage their own revenue based on a consumption tax that would fit the needs of each individual state. Rather than having the federal government give tax money back to the states, the idea would be to remove the middleman altogether. Then the states could afford to help their own citizens based on direct need, not a one-size-fits-all concept. I mean, of course, that requires the federal government relinquish control of the lion's share of our taxes, which, is another subject entirely. Now, at a glance, it seems as though, the Graham-Cassidy bill would return the authority over managing health insurance coverage to individual states. And while the federal government would continue to collect exorbitant amounts in taxes, they would redirect some of those funds back to the states. Now, I still don't like the idea of the federal government playing middleman with our money, but until you can solve the issue with taxation, it just makes sense that the federal government would need to give money to the states. Now, again, I'm not fluent with all the details of this bill, but like I said, this could be a step in the right direction. And no, it's not perfect, but what we're doing is we're planting a seed of federalism, and it can be nurtured in the coming years. Now, if there's nothing else to like about the Graham-Cassidy bill, it's almost comical to see the reaction from the media and our career politicians at the thought of reducing federal power. I mean, do you think they were given a terminal medical diagnosis with only days left to live? In street vernacular, it's almost like a swift kick in the sack, maybe 2 or 3, and then followed by a swift curb stomp. I mean, look, the Uniparty, especially the Democrat wing, has fought so hard to gain control over our healthcare industry, and the potential for the federal government to relinquish that power back to the states where it belongs, well, we may as well just be cutting off their collective foot or something. And, in an article from CBS News, these people, that's right, I said these people. The news media isn't considered a race yet, so I can say that. So these people, I mean, first, this article was written as complete propaganda. They make bold, sweeping claims without any specific references or arguments. See what I was saying last week about how the news media chooses what goes into the news cycle? Imagine the headline. The federal government relinquishes control over our illegally seized health insurance industry. I mean, now that is a headline. What's more, if the federal government does return power over health insurance back to the states, it would be a completely factual headline. Not fake news, real news. Something the news media seems to have lost sight of. But this article cites, Larry Levitt of the Kaiser Family Foundation, and he says, every state has to start from scratch, creating its own health insurance program. Why, yes. In fact, every state should already have a health insurance plan in the works. If not, they should all be busting their rear ends, to have an action plan ready. I mean, they don't have to start from scratch either. There are countless examples and models out there to choose from that fit, practically any governing style. Levitt says these states, they'll have to provide health insurance and, in some cases, with reduced federal funding, and in other cases, with increased federal funding. Once our federal government's only taking the taxes necessary to support their role in Article 1, Section 8, California would be free to tax its residents however high they want to pay for all the programs they want. Whether or not that would be sustainable is another issue, but the point is our federalism is freedom. It lets the people of California decide how they want to live while allowing the people in other states the same freedom. The article, it also speaks of a bipartisan group of governors who called on state Republicans to give up their effort to repeal Obamacare and pursue a bipartisan plan instead. They claim only bipartisan approaches can achieve true, lasting reforms. Excuse me? First of all, my faith in a governor's knowledge of the Constitution took a serious blow when former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue insisted the Supremacy Clause means every federal law is considered the law of the land, regardless of its constitutionality. No, I don't assume any governor is knowledgeable of their duties or their oaths simply based on their existence in office. But now to say bipartisan support is necessary only goes to prove the uniparty concept. Partisan means, you're working to represent one political party. When you're bipartisan, you have two political parties working together. Now, when you consider that the entire purpose of a political party is to amass power, do we really want both sides working to amass power together? Getting a hint as to why I call them the uniparty yet? What we need is for lawmakers to come together in a non-partisan manner. That means we approach the solution from a neutral standpoint, without the interest of the ultimate special interest groups in mind. And again, focus solely on what is best for our citizenry, for our liberty. These governors really seem like, they just want the federal government to, do all the heavy lifting so they can just kick back and take it easy. Well, I'm sorry. Governing ain't easy. That's part of the deterrent, especially keeping it a temporary appointment. Governing is a service, not a badge of honor, not a way to propel your personal wealth or success. There isn't much that riles me up faster than an elected official who blatantly ignores their oath of office. It's become so commonplace over the decades that they don't even hide it anymore. That's the problem with the Affordable Care Act and just about every other health care plan there is. They're all illegal. It's illegal because it violates the Constitution of the United States. Article 6, Clause 2 declares the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, meaning no other law is greater. So when the Constitution limits a type of government to specific duties, like our federal government with Article 1, Section 8, and then that type of government ignores those limitations by doing whatever it wants, well, it's violating the supreme law of the land. In layman's terms, you're breaking the law. It took me a while to get there, but you're welcome, America. No, for real, though. Let's look at it this way. All right, if I have a valid driver's license and I drive, then I'd be driving legally and everything would be fine. Now, if I allow that license to expire and I continue to drive, I'm doing something the law declares I am not allowed to do. I'm not overreaching the law, I'm breaking the law. Now, the same is true whether I drive in excess of the speed limit, claim ownership of something that doesn't belong to me, or even if I flat out punch someone in the face. These are all examples of actions I could take that would violate the law and be considered illegal. So then why is it that, when our politicians can break the law by violating the Constitution? They can't. It's illegal. In fact, this is the very definition of illegal. I mean, according to Merriam-Webster, illegal means not according to or authorized by law. You know, even the great and powerful Google defines illegal as contrary to or forbidden by law. Did you see that? Contrary to. Politicians are not granted special permission by the supreme law of the land to ignore the supreme law of the land. That means just like the rest of us, when they violate the law, they're doing something illegal. Now, in this regard, the authority of the federal government is limited to Article 1, Section 8. Nowhere in Article 1, Section 8, or anywhere else in the Constitution, for that matter, does it grant the federal government authority over health insurance. Nowhere. Now, this is important because the federal government has completely taken over our healthcare system through the manipulation of health insurance. The federal government is acting outside its legal authority. It is breaking the law. But, anyway, I mean, if we are, in fact, moving back toward a constitutionally based system, then we are truly in luck. And adherence to our constitutional federalism offers the most personalized freedom to the most people in this country. I mean, a state could be run by essentially any system the citizenry chose, from socialist and progressive to libertarian and conservative or anything in between. The only stipulations really would be that the states have to take care of themselves and they must adhere to the limits of the Constitution. Now, I know a lot of people claim, millions will be left out in the cold and states won't be able to take care of their citizens. And, I find that to be nonsense. I mean, those state legislators who ignore the plight of their citizenry won't remain state legislators for long. I mean, that's the power of the citizenry through the voting booth. States will be compelled to help. I mean, if not, the legislators can be replaced with folks who will address the needs of their citizens. Also, the overall success of a state is largely dependent upon the citizenry. If the citizens are doing poorly, then the state will do poorly. I mean, and no one wants their state to fail. State legislators will learn to compare the needs of their people against their own budgets and strike a balance that makes sense for them. I mean, that is a state's responsibility under the Constitution and is the state's duty to its citizenry. So yeah, the state certainly has a vested interest in helping their citizenry prosper. And Jimmy Kimmel, I mentioned him earlier. I mean, he had a list of alarmist grievances on his show last Wednesday, and among them was this notion that the states will let insurance companies run amok. I mean, Jimmy's forgetting one thing. The states are run by our citizens. It's the job of our citizenry to elect legislators who will uphold their oath to support and defend the Constitution. I know it's easier to want political parties to just run everything for us, but parties will always push toward their agenda. Always. That's why we must work toward educating our fellow citizenry. I mean, if a minority feels as though they're underrepresented by their state, then they need to know that there's a solution. They can rally their friends, their families, and their neighbors. They can get signatures and entry fees. I mean, they can move people to go to the polls and vote them into office. In this process, it's not limited to race or gender. Anyone with enough support can run for office. And it kills me, the excuses people make. Oh, well, it's a white man's game, and I can't get that kind of money. This is the year 2017. You can run a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe page for just about any reason. I mean, you can reach out to celebrities and investors like you never could have before. If you reach out to the right person at the right time with the right pitch for the right movement, you'll find support. White people only vote for white people. Oh, really? Because if that were true, Barack Obama never would have been president. According to the Roper Center, 43% of white voters voted for Obama in 2008. Considering 74% of voters were white? Yeah. So nearly anyone can run for office. And those of us who know this, well, I mean, this is what I mean when I say we need to educate or enlighten our fellow citizens. They're under the mistaken belief that they're subjects under an oppressive system designed to keep them down. The people convincing them of these lies, they're the ones keeping them down. Our system is designed to give anyone a chance. It's designed that way specifically because we're supposed to have regular, everyday, ordinary citizens holding public office, serving their term, and then returning to their normal lives. All they really need to do is understand the facts of the Constitution, to learn how it works to everyone's benefit. Then, they just have to uphold their oath to support and defend the Constitution. In other words, learn how to make positive change for their communities using the laws and limitations of the Constitution rather than ignoring it. If we find and elect enough people like that at the same time, wow, could you imagine? Leaving party agenda aside to truly follow the Constitution? Well, that's what we should be working toward. We can't do it alone. People think Ray Kroc's greatest gift to mankind was McDonald's. Oh, definitely not. Ray Kroc's greatest contribution to mankind is the quote, "None of us are as good as all of us." You just don't get any more American than that. More Dawn on the air in just a moment. This is a Federalist Moment with Don Weston, brought to you by the Federalist Coalition. Populism is generally defined as support for the concern of ordinary people. Now that doesn't sound so bad, does it? What ordinary citizen doesn't want their needs to be taken seriously or given priority? Well, the problem stems from the fact that populism is a very broad and indistinct term. That's probably why populism can be accurately used by nearly anyone to spur a populace to action for almost any reason, so long as it opposes the elite. Haha, the elite, generally defined as a select group that is superior to the rest in terms of ability or quality. Yeah, just another subjective term used to categorize people based on personal preference. After all, one person's elite is another person's normalcy. And the people. More of a phrase than a term, really, but even more subjective than the other two. The people, in a political sense, describes the citizenry of a country, especially when considered in relation to those who govern them. Now, this phrase is so subjective that it never fails when, after an election, you have people from all sides claiming the people have spoken or were silenced, now regardless of who wins. Folks typically consider their side to be the people, regardless of any statistical or factual information. Now, to illustrate these points, here are a few examples of the more famous world leaders, nations, movements, or other political entities who use populism to stir a populace to action. They include Hugo Chavez, Hitler's Nazi Party, the Occupy movement, labor unions, the Tea Party movement, Ross Perot, Bernie Sanders, Donald J. Trump, and yes, even the alt-right and Antifa are all proper examples of populist movements. Essentially, anytime a politician or other political entity or movement pits the people against a system of elites, you have a populist movement. Now, as you can see, populist movements can appeal to nearly anyone, which is likely why populism is becoming the go-to phrase to symbolize the anti-elite. Unfortunately for the United States, populism, by its very definition, works in opposition to our Constitution. Surprising, I know. After all, the Constitution is a document written by the people, for the people. Well, one must remember that the Constitution may have been written by the people, but its purpose was to define a balance of power between our state and federal governments. Now, it was expected that ordinary citizens, the people, would be the ones to fill these various government positions. The laws that were set in place were designed to prevent or limit the creation of a ruling class or elite in the first place. It's only been the result of subsequent laws that ignore or circumvent the limits of the Constitution and historically pushed by political parties such as the Democrats and the Republicans that have empowered a ruling elite. You see, we don't need an abundance of subjective terms to help define the difference between the people and the ruling elite. We already have a solid, clearly defined term: federalism. The balance of power for our federalism is strictly defined by our Constitution. So rather than placing hopes or faith in a term that could mean different things to different people, we should enforce the system that's already in place. After all, when you're dealing with subjective terms, terms with definitions that can be influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions, no one can truly be free. Would you prefer to have your freedoms guaranteed by personal whim or the rule of law? Now you can discover more truths about federalism at thefederalistcoalition.org. This is Don on the Air. So we've been discussing our federal government's health insurance takeover. Now, again, I have a lot of problems with it, but the biggest problem, of course, is that it's illegal. Now, none of our governments get to decide, what their duties are. And those duties, they're spelled out in plain old English, in the Constitution of the United States. And when we ignore the limitations of the Constitution, we invite the government to keep changing the laws to suit their goals. Their needs, not ours. The Constitution protects our needs. So when we allow the government to ignore the law, it's as if we sabotage ourselves. Welcome back to Don on the Air. Now that seems a little silly, doesn't it? I mean, it's like we intentionally poke holes in our own umbrella before heading out into the storm, or we cut all the seatbelts in our own vehicles before driving, or maybe even packing our parachutes with bowling balls, before jumping from an airplane. I mean, the same could be said for turning ourselves over to socialism. Now, I know that word's taken on new or rather a twisted meanings over the past few years. Folks are using populism to promote socialism to lead us toward communism. Now, I know that's a lot of isms coming at you fast, but we'll slow it down a moment. You see, I opened this segment with a Federalist moment about populism. Now, in case you missed it, populism, it's a catch-all term that's used to describe any political movement that pits the populace against a system of elites. Now, there's no ideology to populism, no set values or principles. The only requirement for populism is that one group struggle against some other group who are perceived as elite. Now, of course, the term elite is based on perspective, as is what populism stands for. So that's why populism is a dangerous label to cling to. Throughout history, populism has not led to freedom for the citizenry. Most often, populism is used as a tool for control. When you couple this personal type of influence with a redistribution style of equality, you achieve socialism. Now, socialism is a system in which the government owns and administers the means of production and the distribution of goods. The government provides for all the citizenry's needs, and there's no personal property. Everything is communal. Now, this sounds very much like communism, and that's because socialism and communism are virtually the same thing. In order to avoid violent takeover or a forced transition into communism, a government needs the will of the people behind it. This is why populism is such a useful tool. Populism is used to harness the discontent of the common man and tradition that into votes. And the people and policies, voted for ignore the Constitution and focus on instant gratification or perceived need. As a result, the populace surrenders its rights little by little, bit by bit. And the government, it needs us to surrender our own rights so they don't have to take our rights from us. And that's why they need us to submit to socialism. Once the government has been given complete control, it's a simple matter to maintain that control with force. Then you've become a communist government. A communist system is where all production of goods are state-owned, and a totalitarian centralized government controls the distribution of goods to the populace. Again, it's nearly identical to socialism, except at this point, the vote no longer matters. This is why adherence to our Constitution is vital to the continued existence of American liberty. Communism, socialism, these aren't boogeymen. They're neither conspiracy theory nor fairy tale. These are serious issues we're facing as various groups strive to shape the landscape of our political structure. They work on premises like, well, for instance, the poor versus the rich. The poor look at all the cool stuff the wealthy has and they think, wow, man, they sure do have a lot of great stuff. I want great stuff too. It's not fair that they have great stuff and I don't. And so they turn to the government for equality. Now, these people, they actually think equality will be the government giving them all the same stuff the wealthy has. That's just not how it works. The government will instead take everything from the wealthy and make everyone equally poor, using the remainder to fund itself. The only people who truly benefit is the leadership, the people who decide who get what allotment. Now, with eyes wide open, we have a Congress who routinely passes laws they themselves are not subject to. So what makes you think that these people would act any less selfishly if given total control over everything? You don't like me using those people as examples? Fine. Then use, a few of the socialist leaders out there. Not world leaders, the ones in our communities. Consider for a moment that these people want the government to take things away from some people and give them to others. How is that not selfish? How is that not seeking total control over everything? You think your motives are justified, and you feel as though your motives are justified, but in reality, you're just using an exaggerated version of the system you claim to despise. You're trading one master who has, at least some rules for a master who has no rules at all. It reminds me of Black Lives Matter. The core leadership, at least, want to dismantle local police forces and allow communities to self-police. Again, they want to trade a police force with at least some rules for another one with no rules at all. And they all claim to be pursuing populist goals. They are looking out for you. That's funny because they all want to abolish or control the Constitution. Well, the Constitution is your only protection against the government. So how is opposing the Constitution looking out for you? People will then say, oh, the Constitution doesn't work or it doesn't apply to everyone. Well, the 14th Amendment ensures the Constitution applies to everyone, even non-citizens, because it applies to any person. Now, if the Constitution doesn't appear to work, that isn't the fault of the Constitution. It's we, the citizenry, who aren't working. The fact is, the Constitution is just words on a piece of paper. Literally, that's what it is. But what breathes life into this document? From where does it derive its power? From the government? Well, the Constitution exists to limit the government. The government, by its mere existence, is in conflict with the Constitution. That's why the government constantly ignores or creates workarounds to the Constitution. So no, the Constitution does not derive its power from the government. So then it must be from our states, right? The states represent us. Oh, wait. The Constitution limits our state governments as well. No, you see, we are the ones who give the Constitution its power. The Constitution exists to protect us by limiting government. We, the ordinary citizen, we are the ones who benefit the most from the Constitution. And the only way the Constitution stops working is when we stop enforcing it. We enforce it not through violence or protests like these groups would have you believe. We enforce the Constitution with our vote. We educate our fellow citizens, starting with our friends and our family and onto our neighbors and our communities. We remind people why the Constitution protects us and how it works. Once empowered, enlightened candidates will step forth and we rally behind them. Get these people elected into office. These people who will actually honor their oath to support and defend the Constitution. The Constitution must be our rallying point. It's a true neutral document that pertains to everyone equally, and it's a vital tool for our citizenry to use to keep our governments under control. When we succumb to the influence of random groups who cater to one specific group or cause unrest within our citizenry against other citizens, we surrender our liberty. Either the government takes control and forces us to behave a certain way, or we end up abolishing government and we're subjected to Darwin and the survival of the fittest. The Constitution is our best chance. It's the best chance we have for fairness and equality under the law, which, must be enforced by us, or else it truly becomes just another piece of paper with some writing on it. And that's the real reason certain politicians and all of the media outlets are panicking over the Graham-Cassidy healthcare bill. I was just talking about it in the last segment. That bill appears to be a move toward returning control of our health insurance industry back to the states and the private sector. The government desires control over our health insurance because healthcare is something everyone can use. And it's not a right, but it is important to our lives, much like food and water. The government wants to provide healthcare to us under the premise of taking care of the citizenry, so that it'll endear us to them. The idea is to make us need the government. And the more we need, the more they take, and the more they provide, and the more we need, and the more they take, and the more they provide, and on it goes until, once the government runs out of things to take, they stop providing. Then we have hours-long food lines, hoping for a loaf of bread and a couple of packs of dry soup mix, maybe a half a roll of toilet paper for next week's ration. You think it couldn't happen here, but it's simple logic. Money doesn't materialize out of thin air. People find ways of convincing others to give it to them. We call them the wealthy. The government comes along and it takes the money from the wealthy. Does everyone then become wealthy? No, everyone becomes poor. Once that money is gone, where does the government go to get more? There is no place to go, so they hoard what they have. Go ahead and substitute money for any regulated need or good. Goods are not always tangible products. Healthcare is a product. Oil, gasoline, electricity are products. Food, water, and yes, even shelter are products whose production and distribution can be controlled by the government. The pro-socialism media campaign, it's frightening, absolutely frightening. It targets our youth and attempts to make socialism trendy. Come on. Someone had to make the decision to promote Che Guevara, right? Sure, the guy was a murderous, racist, and communist, right? Who cares? He's an excellent marketing symbol to feed off a sense of rebellion in our youth. I wonder how many of those anti-capitalists realized they were being manipulated by capitalists. Bernie Sanders ran across the country. Well, he traveled across the country. He's no Forrest Gump. But Bernie, he traveled the country declaring we take from the rich and give to the poor. According to him, some folks have earned too much money, and so the government needs to take that money and give it to the poor in the form of free college education and free health care, and then, it'll be free resources like food and clothing and water and shelter, and then we'll be completely dependent upon government. And when the money runs out and the conditions deteriorate, the government can enforce socialism and turn it into communism. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Are you starting to see how it all circles back around? It wasn't long ago that Antifa was, in Boston demonstrating at a rally. And the rally they were demonstrating at was a pro-free speech rally. These people, yes, again, I said these people don't realize that our freedom of speech is what gives them the right to protest in the first place. Essentially, they're protesting their own right to protest. I saw someone on Twitter suggesting the proper way to protest your right to protest is to just stay home. But the problem is that people actually believe surrendering their rights will make their lives better. Or rather, they believe things will come to them for free, like free college. I mean, how perfect would that be? You know, the government could control every step of your education, from preschool through grade school and on into college. The Department of Education could disseminate any information it wished through the masses over time, so it made a lasting effect. You know, this coupled by an obedient news media who chooses stories, which create a news cycle that shapes and shifts public opinion. I mean, it's all set up. Nearly everything is in place. If only it weren't for that pesky Constitution. Oh, but hey, that's okay. After all, politicians, they ignore the Constitution every chance they get, don't they? The citizenry only pushes back when the government takes too great a step. So when the government, tiptoes forward with incremental changes, the populace doesn't even notice. And when they do, again, the government has educational conditioning and the news media and entertainment media to massage the populace, to groom us for a proper controlling. Now, if you're listening to this show, you're either already awake to all of this or you're just now waking up. But I can't stress enough how important it is that we enlighten our fellow Americans. Because if we don't, someone else will. And right now, it's the government, using education and the news and the entertainment media, and they've almost got it locked down. I mean, once they have full control over the internet, the government will have control over all forms of our communication. Or haven't you noticed? With the First Amendment gone or restricted to only certain types of speech, we'll not be able to communicate unregulated. Everything we say will be filtered and monitored. This isn't science fiction. This isn't fantasy. China does it. North Korea does it. You honestly don't think it can happen here? Good old NIMBY? Not in my backyard. Well, with eyes wide open, do you know why something tragic but preventable always seems to happen in places where people think it can never happen? Because thinking it can never happen causes people to relax. If you believe it can never happen, you have no reason to be on guard against it. This makes it easier for that something that can never happen to actually happen. We set our own selves up to face, a preventable tragedy with complacency. This is why we must all act, and we must act now. Read the Constitution, share it with others, vote for people who will not only exhibit a knowledge of the Constitution, but display the principles required to uphold an oath to support and defend the Constitution. This is our path to reclaim and maintain our liberty. But we'll be back with more Don on the Air in just a moment.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
This is Don on the Air, and my buddies Anthrax there are reminding me that I've ranted myself slap out of time. I don't have a mechanism yet for taking calls, but still, folks have been sending me comments. And you can too. Tweet them to me at Don on the Air. I'll definitely notice if you use the hashtag DonOTA. And you can also email me at donontheair@klrnradio.com. I think sometime in the near future I'll reserve some time to address some of your feedback directly. In the meantime, stay tuned to KLRN Radio for our very own Rowdy Rick Robinson with America Off the Rails. Also, be sure to check out The Outer Limits, Sundays at 9 Eastern. It's music and sci-fi and comics and basically cult classic culture at its finest. And host Steve Long blends it all together very well. Now, as for me, I'll see you here next Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Or, in between, thanks to being able to stream the show anytime from KLRNradio.com. But in between times, let me leave you with this little anecdote. I once had a girlfriend, and we were going through some stuff. We said some mean things to one another, and then later, I wanted to apologize, but I just couldn't face her. So I sent a friend of mine to go talk with her for me, to help her understand how I knew I was wrong and how sorry I was. I didn't see him for a while, and so I decided to go check on him about 20 minutes later, and of course, they were hooking up. It's what I think about every time I consider sending off another career politician to change the government for me. Take it for what you will.